Hi everyone! I am going back down the rabbit hole of Sinbad, The Battle of the Dark Knights, which you might remember I've done quite a bit of interviews about by this point, and I did a movie nights on. Today I was able to talk to Elvis Restaino, who you might remember from the movie as Murky Khan. He also directed the Bulgarian portions of it, and he was able to shed some light on just what happened. So take a listen and enjoy. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me today. I'm really excited to get into this because I've talked to other people involved with Sinbad, but they were involved with the Jordan side of the production. And
Right.
from what I recall, you were part of the Bulgarian production. So how did you get involved with all of this?
So I wrote this script called The Good Life, which Alan and Dion bought. And they were about to produce this film. And we got to talking after they purchased the film, and they ended up giving me a job with their company, FM Entertainment. So it was fun. I was younger. I lived down the street. I'd ride my bike to work. I think it was like $450 a week. It was great though. You were involved in like filmmaking. And I was always a designer, so I thought it would be fun to get involved in filmmaking because it's almost impossible to become a production designer in the world of film. It's such an incestuous who you know business that it was easier for me to write scripts, act in movies, direct movies than to actually get a production design job. So you hustled. You did anything you needed to do to work, and it was all about design for me. That was the point of this whole adventure that I went on. So when they hired me, Alan would take me to the video conferences and the sales, and I learned the business side of the business. So at the time when movies were shot on film, now mind you, Sinbad was shot on film. So the first version that was cut was literally cut on film. They were like splicing film. And you would assemble this like 3 hour long, very loose cut assembly, and then you would get that digitized because at the time it was not cost effective to digitize everything. So you would assemble a loose cut, digitize it, and then kind of manipulate the film. And I mean, our first cut, we're literally like going through a reel to reel and splicing film. It was pretty intense. And that's the side of design that I was always fascinated with because designers today, everyone's looking at a high definition monitor. The Federal Express guy could come in and go, you know what? I don't like the way that background looks. And then everyone flips out and goes, oh my God, the background sucks. At that time, you really had to pay attention to what type of film it is, how colors are affected by that film, or the cross bleach process, all these really interesting technical aspects of filmmaking that you only discovered during the dailies. So you'd work all day and then you'd sit in the theater and they would project these dailies. And that's how you learned what color popped, how you could tell a story through color and texture. And it was really an art form because monitors were like black and white and grainy, and they were used as reference. They weren't used as to control your palette in the moment. So all this information is, I'll address your first question. Oh my God, Baphisto's costume, it didn't match. So what I was given was a hat in a box and no photographs, and it kind of looked like this. So I had my artists in Bulgaria, when they created that book, draw a picture of Baphisto, and I didn't mimic my costume, what they shot in Jordan, because there was no reference. I mimicked it after a cartoon impression.
Okay.
So there was really no pictures, nothing. They sent a hat and a box. And it kind of looked like this, and it was like, maybe, I really don't know. I never saw any of the dailies. I think they were held up for some reason. I had no reference. The only thing I had was these horrible script notes of what we shot, what we didn't shoot. And trust me, they didn't shoot anything chronologically. So it was shot all across the board.
So
And
you
then,
really had very little to work with then, trying to piece this together.
oh yeah, I had no idea what they shot at all. Just, we shot this scene. But sometimes the scene that they shot, they had an interpretation of the script. So it wasn't even what the script said. So that wasn't the difficult part. The difficult part was I was writing Bloodsport 4 at the time. So we'll share what the business used to be. I'm not really involved anymore. It could be the same, but it's a little bit different. You would pre-sell territories based upon either theatrical release or video release. You know, video was huge. And territories or countries or territories within those countries would give you money. So your profit was built in. Sinbad in the Battle of the Dark Knights was sold to territories based upon an idea. People put down a down payment. The only thing you needed to do is deliver a film, and your profit was already built in. That's how the companies like FM Entertainment survived. So Alan was in panic mode because he just needed to deliver a film to get the rest of the money. He didn't have to hustle and sell the film. So when you're a critic, let's say, and I'm not being critical of critics, they're like, well, how could the movie be this bad? It really is irrelevant. You know, it's tough to describe to an actor, listen, I really don't give a shit about your performance because it's going to be dubbed in Chinese, Yugoslavian, Russian, Spanish. So all your English words, I mean, it's great for our territory, which was a small portion of, you know, all the foreigners paid for that film. So I always knew it was never going to be an English released film. Now, I didn't say this to the actors. And, you know, obviously you hope that the film will be released domestically. But, you know, what are the chances of making an incredible film when I don't even know what the heck I'm trying to patch together? So my goal to Alan was finish on time and on budget. You know, so that's like an art form being controlled by a business sense, you know. It's a tough trade-off. But that was my obligation, finish it on time and on budget. And I think our budget in Yugoslavia at the time, you know, they spent so much money. I think I had $85,000 to shoot all that in 18 days.
That's really a big task.
It was really intense, you know, and shooting on film. You don't realize how slow the process was, like how much screen time ratio shooting film you get. I mean, you shot all day. It was maybe what, 7 minutes of quality film? I mean, it was a battle. That was the battle, you know. But that's fast forward. So I was writing Bloodsport 4 to get back on this wheel of you write something, you present something, people give you money, and you make a movie. So, you know, I was in France with Alan at the Cannes Film Festival, where they have a film festival and they also have a film market. I don't know if they still continue to do that. So you sell your territories again and introduce a film, and you know, they bought Bloodsport, so they pre-sell Bloodsport 2 and 3 and 4, and hopefully you deliver 3 while you're making 4. And you know, Sinbad was still never delivered at the time. So all these buyers would come by and Alan would go, I want to sell you some more films. But they're like, well, I bought this film that hasn't been delivered. Where is it? So he goes, listen, Elvis, why don't you go to Bulgaria and do some location scouting for me? So I started out as the location scout because he met this producer there that said, oh, I could shoot your movie really cheap. And Bulgaria was going through this like revolution. I mean, really horrible revolution where the mafioso, which were the athletes and the strongmen and the fighters and the boxers and the wrestlers, were taking over the country. And there was turmoil. They were like, a year before, they were ripping the copper pipes out of the street. I mean, it was really, their inflation hit like 1,400%. It was insane. So no one was making a film there anymore. It was like a battleground. So Alan like goes, why don't you go and see if they could make movies over there? And I did, and I met all these really creative, incredible people that haven't worked in like 8 years. There was like a gap. So they had these amazing Brianna Studios, which was like desolate, and all these actors that weren't working, and stuntmen. And the community was really incredible, and I embraced everyone, you know, having an artistic mind. And I was over there for like 3 months, touring the whole country, seeing what locations were grandiose enough to deliver a quality film known as Sinbad. So you're coming from Jordan, which was like, you know, my reference to Jordan were photographs of Jordan, not of the movie. It was pretty intense trying to look. We shot here, we shot there, we shot there, and I saw these really incredible ancient backdrops. So that's why, the locations I selected in Bulgaria paled in comparison, but they were grandiose in size, like that cave and a lot of other places. I found all these locations. I found the costume people. I found the art people. I found everyone to make the movie. And Alan was concerned, is it possible to make a movie in Bulgaria? Now, we opened the floodgates. I could actually say, we were the first American production over there to do a feature. Now everybody does it, but no one did it. Maybe a few French companies did commercials, but that's about it. Everyone was afraid to go over there. So it was great. And Alan was supposed to direct the movie. So I was over there and I had a lot of stuff organized. As an artist, you pay, I have extremely high standards, and standards comes judgment, judgment comes bullying, there's all this variation. But I had so much intense work with costumes and locations and rewriting a script. And I finally pieced together in that 3 months, here's this plan to finish your movie. And I presented it, and he said, this is great. So the book was a vehicle to bounce back from Jordan to Bulgaria, because I really had no idea what I was bouncing back to. And the original story was a boy, not a kid, a boy, like Jerry Maguire boy, cute little kid. He, didn't know who Sinbad was. And he loved box kites, and his dad was so busy and he ignored him, and the grandfather came over and he was afraid because he smelled. People ask, what's this fart thing? It was a little boy, the Shining kid. It was all this, why The Shining? Why a boy? Well, Doug Milson was the cinematographer and he worked on The Shining as a cameraman with Kubrick. So all these ideas, were organic. Okay, a little boy, here's this storybook that came to life. It was whimsical.
That explains the kite scene too, the detail about him being obsessed with kites.
Yeah, he had this really, he just wanted to engage with his dad, and his dad was too busy. So he felt bad, and he was like, I can't fly my kite alone. A box kite takes 2 people. There was a little more sophisticated. I know I was a bit didactic with the writing, but what I was just like, okay, here's a boy, and there's a kite scene in the movie already. That was written. So how do you piece it together in real time? There was certain parameters I had to follow. Like, I didn't invent the kite. There was a scene where Sinbad had these aerial box kites that his army made, and that's how he beat the Murky Khan, So they were weapons of mass destruction. So I get a phone call. Alan's still directing the movie. I'm not directing it. So Dion thinks her brother's directing the movie. Alan's in England trying to raise money for Bloodsport 4, which was more valuable to him than directing Sinbad. And plus Doug Milson was over there. He's like, well, you guys can handle this. Why don't you just direct it? I'm like, you're out of your mind. He goes, well, I'm trying to raise money for Bloodsport 4, which was very interesting to me because I was always like, oh, cool. I get to work on Bloodsport 4. So I was creating opportunities for myself as a production designer. And oddly enough, because of that, you become an actor. Well, why does this ego, maniacal Elvis Restaino act in the movie? Because no one else could speak English in the whole entire country of Bulgaria. And the Murky Khan became that explanatory character that propelled the story forward. And to answer your question, like, why did he break that plane and look into the camera? Was because it was supposed to dissolve into an illustration of him. So all this information in the first 20 minutes, like, they had Mickey Rooney, because when he was at the soundstage, we made him say all this information in the beginning of the movie, which I thought was even more confusing. But the Murky Khan's character became this vehicle to bring us up to speed. So the little boy, as he was getting used to this book, and the grandfather was explaining the story, the Murky Khan we were going in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. So the Murky Khan, as he looked into the camera, it was to freeze frame on an illustration and do the dissolve, like I did the dissolve of the mother. So I had a lot of these creative planned segues. So that explains why he was hamming to the camera all the time. And half the dialogue was supposed to be either the grandfather reading it or the boy reading it, like a book. So it would segue out of those moments.
One of the things that I found interesting about this, obviously it's a movie where you can tell that there were some issues getting it completed, but I was surprised at how cohesive it was made with some of the elements from your portion, with the storybook element, and some of the things added to it I thought were interesting beyond just this is a story they're telling. I thought it was very interesting segments where you would pan out and the living room was in the cave and things like that. And I thought that was a very interesting visual.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's what I do. I'm not a director. Back in the day, you created these, we'll call them creative segues or properties, I would call them, for the director to utilize to create a style for himself, So I did all the costumes, I did all the set design, and I created all those segues. The dialogue, majority of it was supposed to come out of the book with the grandfather, because I didn't know, like I always had in the back of my mind, like I don't think this movie's ever going to be dubbed in English, like ever. So I wasn't concerned like I have this New Jersey accent playing the Murky Khan, because I knew some Spanish guy, some Yugoslavian guy, somebody else was going to dub my voice. I even thought they were going to dub my voice here with someone else. But to try to share that with an actor, like a real actor, they wanted to choke me, these actors. You don't discuss budget. There's no low budget to an actor. Here's an opportunity. I got cast in a movie. It's a pretty intense journey actors go on, which I've learned. They're almost as sensitive as production designers, almost. But you're with these creative people, and my goal was to finish a movie. Like, what are the choices? Your performance wasn't that good in this particular scene or this take, but the sun's going down and I need to do 2 more shots. My obligation was to finish the movie.
And you only had 2 of the original actors come back, right? Dante Bosco and Anthony DeLongis?
Yeah, so let's go further. So I'm expecting a little boy and Sinbad, Richard Grieco. And 2 weeks before production, oh, by the way, we got this kid. I mean, what does that mean, kid? Like he was 15 years old. I'm like, this is a storybook and a grandfather. That's ridiculous. And, oh, by the way, there's no Sinbad. Well, what do you mean there's no Sinbad? Well, he's not coming. Who's coming? I'm like, oh, my God.
Wow.
Oh, my God. You got to be kidding. You got to be kidding me. So I was just like, how do you make Sinbad without Sinbad? And Sinbad had so much left. He was by far, I would say, a lot of that dialogue from the Murky Khan to the grandfather and the little boy and, why the kid becomes Sinbad. That was another question. Like all of a sudden the kid becomes Sinbad, It's like he had to because there was no Sinbad. Besides almost having like a nervous breakdown, I'm pretty in control of a lot of stuff, but it just kept piling on. And in the midst of that, I could see why Alan didn't want to direct the movie. I was like, I was like a lamb in a slaughterhouse. I was dead. But I thought, I would embrace it. And he goes, why don't you direct the movie? I was like, yeah, why not? And he never told his sister that I was directing the movie. So I'll tell you this funny story. So, talking about emotional journey artists go through, you have this high of like, I don't even care if you don't want to be a director. It's pretty flattering when someone says, why don't you direct this movie? Good, bad, or indifferent. It's flattering. It's like, here's a gallery, fill it up with paintings. Oh my God, here's a movie, production design it, or, every artist. It's one of the greatest feelings in the world to be acknowledged and honored with a project. So, I'm on this high, I'm in Bulgaria, I'm walking around in like 1950 suits, because that's all they had in their prop house, like stopped in like 1955. The prop, everything, the whole country just shut down. Like, why is the kid wearing a suit? Because there's nothing else in this country. There's nothing but like this huge prop house full of like Hitler stuff, German army films, and gangster movies. What am I going to dress him up as a little Hitler? And trust me, I would have done that and it would have been really funny. But so I go, okay, this is great. I planned on shooting this movie and doing everything and organized it. Now, I'm kind of like bopping around from these little shanty hotels all over the country. And Dion has found out that Alan is making me direct the movie, and her head almost exploded. You know, we got along really well, but the fact that she was like, there's no way he's directing this movie. So she was calling over to Bulgaria. Like, I was staying in these tiny, can you imagine these like post-World War II hotels with a little desk and keys on hooks, and this frail kind of guy running the hotel with one little bed in it. And Dion's trying to track me down, and he's phonetically trying to spell all the curse words she is, like, get back to this freaking country, you moron. So there's like all these pieces of paper behind the desk of like, this crazy woman's been calling you all day. And I'm trying to like, what does this mean? Because their alphabet's different than ours. And he was like phonetically, he was just like sweating, like this woman's crazy. She was screaming at me for like 8 hours. So she ends up sending me, Federal Expressing me this ticket back to America because she's like, there's no way you're directing this film. There's no way. So it's the day of our first scene we're about to shoot. And I have my suitcase packed. I haven't slept for 2 days. I'm like in tears. I'm like a complete failure. You know, there's this high of high. I thought maybe she would say, you don't direct it, have Doug direct it. And, you know, be the production designer. And she was so pissed at me, get back to America because I'm going to arrest you. Like it was a crime or something. Like if you direct this movie, you'll go to jail. So I was like freaked out. And I'm sitting there with my suitcase. And, you know, I hired a bunch of college student PAs, and they were my translators too. When I worked with creative people, I wanted to look them directly in the eye. So I had 2 translators, one in my left ear and one in my right ear, whispering to me what they were saying so I could maintain eye contact with these people. And, you know, as an artist, you speak with your hands and your body language, and when you say colors and fabric, I need to read yeses and nos. It was easier than, you know, understanding the language, and they would whisper, follow me around all day, whispering to me so I could look at people in the eye. So one of my translators came over, and he was excited. I'm like, this bastard's excited to take me to the airport. He must have hated me. And he goes, today's the day. And I'm like, yeah, today's the day. And he goes, this is exciting. So he looks at my suitcase. He goes, because he would take me from hotel to hotel. And in his mind, it wasn't scheduled for me to go to another hotel. He's like, what's the suitcase for? He goes, we're shooting in town. We're not going away. I go, what do you mean we're shooting? I go, where are you taking me? To the airport? He goes, no, why? We're going to the set. I go, what do you mean we're going to the set? He goes, first day of shooting. And I remember he like grabbed me by the shoulders, like, you know, you were here 3 months, it's finally here. So no one knew in the country that I was fired except me. So I said, fuck it, let's do this. Dion can have me arrested. So that's why her head, she was like dying because I didn't come home and I went on with the production. It was funny because we're at this castle where a lot of that murky con stuff takes place and those scenes. And it was a beautiful old castle it's a river called the Veden, and that was the closest part to Romania and Yugoslavia. So we traveled up to this northern part of Bulgaria. It was absolutely gorgeous set. And the castle was built on top of this hill, and, you know, for a reason you could see all your enemies approaching. Now, Alan was supposed to come back that day and take over as director, but I still didn't confess to everybody that I wasn't supposed to direct the movie. And like in the distance, it was almost like a like Wile E. Coyote Bugs Bunny show. Like Alan's car was like approaching like 2 hours away. Like you could see the dust coming up off the road. Like there's the one of the Dark Knights approaching the castle. So we broke for lunch, and he finally got there, and I confessed to Doug Milsom. I said, Doug, I have to be honest with you. I kind of lied. Like I got fired, and I kept going with production. He goes, Elvis, I wish I had your balls. He goes, I knew you got fired. I was just going to see how long it was going to take you before Dion threw you off the movie. So he enjoyed the whole, because it was just this, you mentioned there should have been a making of this movie, and it would have been, an incredible documentary of like what it really is like to make a movie. I mean, we don't hear about this stuff because people aren't really proud to confess that they're in over their head. Like everybody thinks they know what they're doing. So Alan gets there, and I'm still writing on a floppy disk. That's how we're going back. I think it took like 7 hours to send like 23 pages of the script back then. 7 hours. And if your modem got disconnected, you'd be like, crap. So for me to send the script sometimes took me like 2 days. So I had Bloodsport 4 that I finished so Alan could seize the money to do pre-production on it. And he gets there and he goes, listen, I got to go back to England. Where's the floppy disk for Bloodsport 4? I said, I have it right here. But Alan, your sister's threatening to lock me up, send me back to America. I have no money. She cut me off. I said, I'm hanging out here. I'm like a vagabond. And I remember he got out of his car and said, give me the disc. And I'm like, I can't give you this disc. This is the only like power play I have. He goes, okay, you give me that disc. You could direct Bloodsport 4. And what are you going to do with this film? He goes, I'm going back to England. You keep directing. She'll never know. And he got in the car, took the floppy disk, and rode off into the sunset.
That's insane.
Oh, it was crazy. And now I have goats and flames and 85 like extras. Like we were in this small town, so we were literally knocking on people's houses going, put this costume on, you're in a movie. It was insane. And still no one spoke English. So I couldn't even, the little girl that was my sidekick was like a theater actor, a very famous theater actor in Bulgaria. And the older gentleman that played the grandfather was also a very famous actor. They spoke English because they memorized the lines. They didn't know what they were saying. That's what was so fascinating about those two. They were such professionals that they remembered like how words sounded, but they didn't know what it meant. Crazy, right?
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
With the grandfather, I think you could tell. I didn't notice so much with the assistant, the girl that was hanging out with you. I couldn't tell that she couldn't speak English.
So I'm supposed to have a little boy. I'm supposed to have Sinbad. And then I'm supposed to have a bunch of special effects. And the special effects budget at the time, I designed some effects for like $220,000. And they gave me like a flame that came out of my mouth, some of those transitions, this weird hand that Mickey Rooney's hand came about. And then they said, no more. And I'm like, these are like huge parts of the story. They're like, nope. I was like, okay, no Sinbad, no little boy, no effects. So at that point, it was just like, holy cow. But I take full responsibility for it. It is what it is. I think I angered a lot of, well, not Dante, but I think a lot of the other actors, like, who's this idiot directing this movie or playing this part or whatever it was. And my goal was, I was putting together a puzzle with all the pieces were missing, so I was combining like 4 puzzles together. And then, when a puzzle piece doesn't fit, you like think in your mind, well, if I got a hammer, I could like fucking bang it together. That's exactly how I made this movie. I was like hammering scenes together.
You didn't have Sinbad, but you also didn't have the villain. You didn't have Dean Stockwell's character.
No.
So you just had to come up with some doubles and try to sort of piece it into something coherent?
Yeah, well, a lot of the murky Khan stuff was Mephisto's dialogue, was Sinbad's dialogue, it was just information, and it was odd how it was shot. He was supposed to be in the movie a vehicle just to propel the story forward to get us to a point, and that would have worked if the stuff they shot in Jordan was actually usable. I didn't know, whatever Richard Grieco was going through at the time. I heard he was having a pretty, I think it was a personal thing. You grew up with him as an actor, so you're like, okay, he must have embraced this film, and you see scenes of like that he shot over there, so you assume they were usable, but they weren't. It was just so when I got the stuff and we assembled the first take together, it was almost 3 hours, 2 hours and like 50 minutes, the first assembly, and it was on film. Now we're cutting film. And then there were all these like black hole sequences for special effects. And then they say the effects go. And then you're like, oh my God. So you kept, being handcuffed. It was impossible. But I always knew that when the story got dubbed, there's something about the visuals that prevail and not the acting. And I knew that I had really interesting stuff, to assemble a movie. Like stuff that people haven't seen. A lot of those segues and stuff, they weren't in movies yet. They were ahead of their time. Now it's so easy to do those transitions, or like some kid in his underwear in his room could do them. These dissolves were done on film. I don't even know if people understand that, how intense that is. Like that one scene with the gypsy woman, and it transitions into a picture that he's holding, and it segues back into the living room. The grandfather's, reminiscing about his daughter who died. That shot's like a tracking shot with computers and shit. We're guessing. But when you see it, it's pretty intense. Like, what movies did that? Very few. Multi-million-dollar Hollywood movies did that.
I realize, like, I'm saying this as a critic who makes videos like this, but it is very easy for someone to say, like, oh, I could do this or whatever, but there is a lot more behind it, like you're saying, especially when you're making it back then on film when there are less resources available, or it wasn't as simple as, going on a computer and adding an effect.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. That was a written part that the mother died. And I think it came about because they didn't send me to Princess either. No Sinbad, no Princess. They just kept dropping like flies. But we got Dante and we got our other Dark Knight. That doesn't really help me in the movie Sinbad.
The footage that you said was unusable from Jordan, do you mean it wasn't complete, or it just was takes that you couldn't use?
Let's say every movie has good takes and has bad takes. I don't know if their days got interrupted. I can't judge anyone else's work. I can't call it bad because then I would have to know the implications or the situation. So, it just didn't. I mean, when you see some of the scenes, you think to yourself, there were 4 takes. This is the best one of them? What was the worst? You're seeing the best.
Okay. I didn't realize that there was more stuff that just didn't end up in there, for whatever reason.
And I tried to use every beautiful shot. Like, how does characters fall into these pits of the abyss and come back to life? It was odd. Okay, so this is the mistake of an amateur director. What film companies do is they say, you get to edit or assemble, like we'll call it an assemble, the first draft of the film. So you assemble this 3-hour version. And then everyone says, that sucks. Oh, I'll go through it and make it better. So they didn't sit through all the dailies and all the stuff and the hours and hours and hours. They got your assembly, said it sucked, and then made that better. Well, of course, anyone could do that. That's the fun part. So after I assembled the film and was locked out of the editing room, there were just things that I couldn't control anymore, which I don't know if it would have made it better. But, when somebody says, why are you doing this stuff? I mean, I don't know. I don't know the reference to it.
The very last shot of the film, of the kid, the triple zoom in, was that something that they edited in then after you were locked out?
First of all, that triple zoom in is one shot that they zoomed into. It's not three separate shots. So there was this idea of a sequel. At the time, to wrap this up, I thought, okay, here's this book, what's an ending? And, people say the Freddy Krueger stuff and why things got so literal. When you're an artist and you're explaining to someone like, here's Mephisto going through this cavern and I wanted his long arms and nails to stretch across the tower, You could say that was just my ego. I have this special effects guy. I could see what he can do and can't do. And I thought it was very interesting, that scene. Like if he extended his arms and his nails would be scraping across the dome itself. It wasn't a reference to Freddy Krueger, though. It was a reference to Francis Ford Coppola and Dracula about this form. And I didn't know how to explain Mephisto's bleeding out of his nose. They just never gave me enough information. So his deformity, I kind of like, since everyone was morphing and stuff, his body was morphing at the time. I don't know, into something, but whatever it was. And I just thought it was an interesting visual. And the fact that this guy built these gloves for me that had literally sparklers coming out of, and he built these extended arms for this actor who was probably 5'5", and that cavern was 12 feet. And he extended his arms. I was like, wow, that looks cool. That was it. I thought it was very interesting visual. Because I loved the tunnel, and I said, I got to shoot something here, and here's this segue, and, he's getting to the key of knowledge, which I never understood. Because I never saw that footage of him being in, the glass funhouse, and I still never knew what it was, because I never saw the footage. And then the only thing I could reference is, what the dialogue was out of the script.
Was it very different than what was in the script, outside of what they couldn't film, obviously?
No. All the dialogue was shot. Just other characters were saying the things. So, Dean Stockwell had more lines left to explain this key of knowledge. Let's even go back more, because now things are popping into my head. This was supposed to be a karate movie.
What?
Yeah, it was supposed to be starring Daniel Bernhardt. So, Sinbad, the battles were like karate scenes. So that's why when you see the references, this one actor who does a lot of karate, he was very talented over in Jordan. He didn't even come back. But he was like a fight coordinator too. So when I went over to Bulgaria, I didn't even have a fight coordinator. So Anthony wasn't a karate guy. He was like this whip specialist, which looks really good live because of the cracking of the whip and how he controls it, which was had a ballet quality to it. Doesn't really translate to film. What is he doing? Whipping people? Ow. But I look back, yeah, so Daniel Bernhardt was supposed to be in the movie, and all these battle scenes were these really cool kung fu style, whip pans. If you notice, there's a lot of zoom in and whip outs and stuff. That's a very traditional, 1970s Bruce Lee karate film, Japanese style. So you kind of saw that. So there was no battles. The Murky Khan's band of marauders were construction workers and grips. It was funny. They were nice, and you said the vehicle of the living room being transported all over and stuff like that. I just thought it would be interesting visually for people,
Yeah, I thought that was a good transition. It showed more effort into it than just, saying this is a story and kind of... So I could tell that there was work being put into what was being done in Bulgaria. The hint at the sequel at the end, was that something that you came up with, or was that something that was in an idea in the script to eventually try to get a sequel going?
Alan mentioned about, hey, leave it open where we could have a second movie. So it was an afterthought after the thought. And when Anthony's character came back, that's why I made him the father. You're dealing with maybe a 7-year-old boy. Their imaginations are incredibly vivid. The Princess Bride. A lot of times these characters played other roles. And, when that coin and the magic, basically Mickey Rooney's character and the old man were related. That was the point of it. Passed down from generation to generation. This book was Mickey Rooney's story passed down to his son, and then his son and his son. And eventually that older gentleman was Mickey Rooney's great-great-grandfather.
This places some things into some more context.
So the coin and the magic book and the ring were just a little boy interpretation of this. I believe that I wrote it like, I made him as a cat. Cats are very finicky. So the little boy was behind the furniture, and the grandfather knew he was being watched. So it was more dramatic. And the little boy's imagination got the best of him, thinking that his grandfather was this magical person. So think of him as a magician. If you go see magic, you were like, oh my God, how can that possibly be? It's magic, but the stuff that he's fooling you with is incredible. So that was, I failed at that, but that was the intention of the magic. And then it was supposed to go from the living room to bed, like a traditional storytelling story. The reason why it was transported, it came about, when a little boy, he had this like 4-poster bed, and he was afraid of it, and it was dark wood house, and what's under the bed, and there was supposed to be things coming out of the closet, in the closet, your imagination, that kind of a thing. So that's why it was a bit horror film-like.
Were there a lot of things that you weren't able to film that you wanted to kind of make the narrative a little clearer on your end?
Well, no, everything was filmed, but the characters changed. So now you're working with a little boy who's afraid to go to bed at night, whose imagination has gotten the best of him. It's a thunderstorm outside. The branches up against the window look like, a monster. Little stuff, like even the lamp, how he plugged it in, the father's like, don't touch the electrical sockets. You're a kid. You can't do certain things. Certain things, they're scary, like a plug in the wall. When I was growing up in a 1970s house, there were sparks all over the place. Don't pull out cords, you'll get electrocuted, do all this stuff. You take Ryan Slater's character and make him the little kid from The Shining or from the Tom Cruise movie, and then all of a sudden there's this little kid running through the house. Oh my God. It's a little different. The book takes on a different energy for a little boy. When I was little and my mother would read me some of the stories, the grim fairy tales, they were scary. When you went to sleep, you had nightmares. Seeing visuals and movies and Frankenstein books and waking up, sleepwalking, holding my neck. So it took on a different tone. But then, you have an older kid, and then the sarcasm doesn't really translate. Then he just seems, he doesn't like older people. He's mean.
I can definitely see now, knowing this, that it was meant to be from a younger child's perspective, why some of the tone was like it was, and how it would be difficult to match the tone of the other part of the film not being able to see it.
Yeah. So the end of the movie didn't need to be in there. That was just like extra stuff that we shot. I believe the real end of the movie was finally the little boy falling in love with his grandfather. Mephisto gets defeated, good prevails. But the more important story is the little boy is not afraid of his grandfather. Older people are cool just because they're different. I understand you're having an issue with your dad, but you have to understand your mom died. Little boy was going through a lot of shit. So you look at the context of it now, and the scene with Ryan Slater with the gypsy, you look a little bit like my mother. The drama of it, if a little boy is like, Mom, your heart bleeds a little bit. So that's just because I'm a horrible writer. Some things translate to film and some things don't. And you learn that from failing. Unfortunately, in the creative world of the movie business, if you fail, no one ever wants to work with you again. And worse yet, they make you feel incomplete as a person or as an artist. So that's a huge struggle, Those moments you savored, because even today, when I design, there's nothing easy. No one gives me anything. I'm constantly working as hard as I possibly can to create some incredible things for people. And, it's the battle. But those moments when I was younger, doing all that stuff, like being threatened by people, it's pretty harsh. So I kind of laugh today when, what's bullying? Like someone writes a post on some social media and the world goes bananas, where, I'm getting my life threatened. You're going to get your ass kicked. You're the worst director on the planet. You're stupid. People don't know what bullying is. But I used all that in my work today. It never made me want to be a director or work in the film business. This is horrible. There was nothing fun about it.
It sounds like it was a crazy experience for everyone involved, and it sounds like you were dealt a lot of bad hands in the situation. But I'm glad that it's helped build how you do things today, and it seems like that you found some success in your career currently.
Yeah, I love what I do. I've been very fortunate and blessed with some of my projects that I've worked on, and I still do. It's my profession, and like I said, I take full responsibility for everything in that film, even if I had no control over it. The failures that people say, even when I hear them say, I have people still email me about the craziest movies. I've done some really like wacky cult films, and I still get people 20 years later. Like it seems like 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, everyone thinks, oh, he's celebrating some kind of a bicentennial award. Oh, let's contact him. So you notice like a reunion of some sort. And I get these crazy people, some nice and some like, you're the worst director in the world. I'm like, okay. But I look back on those moments, as a creative person, some of the choices, my style now, what works, what doesn't work. It's interesting. As much as I failed on that movie, I had so many breakthroughs and successes because of those failures. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense. And, no matter how the product turned out, I found it very entertaining and I found it very interesting. And I really would like to see a documentary about it someday, because it is just really fascinating to see how this thing was made and how things got lost in translation or changed along the way. Is there anything else about the movie or about what's going on currently with you that you'd like to share with listeners?
I'll give you a hidden cult classic that I was in called Billy Bad, Motorcycle.
Okay.
And that was another film that I did back in that day, but as a performer, which is really interesting and fun. I think you get a kick out of that movie too. Yeah, it's a fun film to check out. There's some clips online, YouTube, that you could get, but I still think you could get the film like on VHS somewhere. Billy Bad or Motorcycle, it depends. Foreign market was Motorcycle. Billy Bad was local.
Sounds
other
great.
than that, if people want to follow design, my website's elvisr.com. I have some pretty interesting stuff. So from that failure, which I think the moral to this whole story is, there are really no failures in life on a creative side. We need to put ourselves out there, and those are those learning moments. And that's where you grow, and you create momentum, and you need to capitalize on that. If you're a great chef, you just didn't cook incredible meals. You cooked some really awful meals, but you had the passion and the desire to make them better. Filmmakers, artists, and I consider myself in that realm of art. So I go from being involved or responsible for what Sinbad and the Battle of the Knights is about to getting the cover of Architectural Digest for designing Gerard Butler's New York City loft.
Excellent.
So, that was as a designer, that's your Academy Award.
That's great.
The most prestigious design magazine, I believe, in the world, getting the cover of it. And mind you, if I wasn't slaughtered and ridiculed and bullied and intellectually dismembered on Sinbad, I would have never had the confidence to design something that got the cover of Architectural Digest.
That's great. And that's a great path to have taken. And your experiences build who you are. So I think that's a great bit of advice to give people that, just to keep going and use these things to build on. I'll put the link to your website in the description, unless there's anything else that you would like to talk about. I think we'll...
No, that was it. Funny, because this is the first time I've spoke about this. And I guess it's about 20 years, maybe even more.
I want to thank you for talking to me about it. Like, it's really enlightening.
Hey, it was a pleasure. I'm like, I get a kick out of, like you said, some things are so bad, they become intriguing. And that is art. Art stays with us. It grows and it evolves. And we discover new things about it every day. That is great art.